Guten Abend. Ich freue mich, dass Sie doch alle gekommen sind, trotz Regen und Sonne heute. Und dass Sie den Weg hier gefunden haben. Das ist auch nicht ganz so einfach, habe ich gefunden. I have the pleasure to welcome you all and introduce our experts and speakers of this event. The evening, which is part of the program of our friends of the Hebrew University of German-speaking Switzerland, also Freunde der Hebräischen Universität der deutschsprachigen Schweiz, is dedicated to new perspectives on diabetes and weight. Neue Perspektiven für Diabetes und Gewicht. Mark Donat, unser erster speaker, our first speaker, is a member of our board and head of the Department of Endocrinology, Diabetology and Metabolism at the University Hospital of Basel and at the university. You may have read quite a few articles lately in the past months, since December, in the NZZ, for instance, where Mark is interviewed and also advises persons addressing their weight reduction, their weight problem. The first pages of the section Wissen of the NZZ am Sonntag of 2 weeks ago were actually dedicated to nie wieder dick, never anymore fat. Interestingly, it included some explanations about cannabinoids as well. I'll show you the NZZ. That was the article. Prof. Dr. Yossi Tam is a well-respected expert. Where is Yossi Tam? Here, okay. Up there, okay. Is a well-respected expert in the field of cannabis and cannabinoids and the director of the Multidisciplinary Center for Cannabinoid Research at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Among his research, we find the focus of the potential impact of cannabinoids on weight regulation and metabolism. You can see him here from close. Up to last year, Yossi was the president of the International Cannabinoid Research Society. Yossi is following in the footsteps of Professor Raphael Meshulam of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, a true pioneer and also defender of the field of cannabinoids, who dedicated this research for 60 years to the topic. Prof. Meshulam holds eminent awards, among them the Israel Prize. He started in the 60s to do this research, and we are very happy that Yossi Tam is continuing this. We very much also appreciate that Dr. Therese Lüthi, scientific editor of the NZZ am Sonntag, will be moderating our panel. Therese is a most respected science editor who is very dedicated to her profession. 2 weeks ago, Therese published an article on the topical and complex discussion of the origins of the coronavirus, actually. In the past years, Therese has published quite a few reports on cannabis, cannabinoids, and a variety of drugs, if I remember well. Prof. Dr. Jürg Gertsch, who is going to join the panel, comes from the university and from the Hospital of Bern. He's a colleague of Yossi Tam and a close contact of his. Prof. Gertsch is a pharmacologist and a biochemist. We are awaiting his additional contribution to our event and discussion with great interest. I'm very curious to find out more and get more definite ideas on diabetes and weight, which seem to be not only a most important, but also a hot topic of today, at least in Switzerland. We are very glad to be able to present an evening including an area of research in natural substances, which in Switzerland is not as developed as in Israel. This event is free of charge. However, we very much appreciate if you decide to become a member of our friends. Furthermore, any contribution and donation towards our friends endeavors, for instance, the support of scholarships for graduate students and for exchange students program at the Multidisciplinary Center for Cannabinoid Research. Wir werden diese Veranstaltung aufnehmen. We will have a recording of this event. Wer den Link zur Aufnahme möchte, soll sich im Anschluss an die Veranstaltung in die vorliegenden Listen eintragen, beziehungsweise vielleicht bestätigen, dass er den Link gerne hätte. Welcome also to Yossi Gall, Ambassador and Vice President of Ambassador Emeritus and Vice President of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and to Daniel Schricki, here, yeah, who is he is at the desk for the European Friends Associations. I hope you will have an interesting evening, actually I'm sure, and pass over the microphone to Mark Donat.
So thank you very much, and thank you very much for the introduction. I have to say that it's not the first time that I'm speaking, but today I'm a little bit nervous because typically I'm speaking in front of anonymous people, and if I don't perform well, then I'm traveling away and that's it. And now here are a lot of friends, my mother is here, so I hope I will perform okay. So why we invited Yossi Tam, probably didn't know, but we have very good food in Switzerland, tam tam, and that fits perfectly to donuts, and we all around found food, and that's the reason for the invitation, beside, of course, the top scientific capacities. So what I'm going to cover is the first question, which is not so trivial, why we should lose weight, then the causes of excess body weight, then something which is very important to my heart, working really daily with patients with overweight, are the stigmas which are associated with being overweighted, and then probably what reason most of you came, the treatment options. So why to lose weight? And in fact, it sounds very simple, but it's not always realized. It's clearly that the major risk factor for type 2 diabetes, and also for type 1, but that there are also other risks there, is overweight. So that's one reason, but also all the cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, stroke, and so on. The major reason is overweight, and something which now has changed is also the major risk factor for cancer is overweight. Also many other diseases like osteoarthritis, gout, and are predisposed by overweight, and last but not least, also depression, Alzheimer's disease, all of that is promoted by overweight. So there is a very good reason to lose weight, and there is a myth that you may sometimes read that it's not so bad to be a little bit overweight. There is also the concept of healthy overweight, and I think it's not very well justified. It's a little bit like you say that you have also healthy smokers. So there are people smoking their whole life, but eventually most of them will have consequences of smoking. Now, how does it work? And it was asked also to say something on my research. I will just spend two slides very shortly on that, and go more on clinical and daily things. But the reason why why obesity causes a disease is most likely due to an inflammatory process. So we know that fatty acid, glucose, cholesterol, all these metabolites that you have when you are overweight induces an inflammatory response mediated by very specific cytokines, and we have a focus on one specific, which is IL-1 beta, and these mediators eventually lead to all these consequences. And this is something we are following now since 15 years. And I have to say, for me, it's now a little bit a milestone because we will have finally a large clinical study within Europe and Switzerland where we test really this hypothesis in such a way that after that we could introduce that in the clinic with a very specific antagonist of this inflammation. But that's more from my research. And now I'd like to go to the next point, which is the causes of this excess body weight. And the causes are, I would say, three main causes. One is the genetic, and that's something which is sometimes not sufficiently appreciated. And we know that there are people saying, I have just to look at food and I'd already increase body weight. And other people say, I can eat whatever I want and nothing happened. And it's true. And there is a lot which is better and better understanding that. But the point is, our genes, we cannot change them. But there are, with this predisposition, there are then other factors. And the two factors is, one is lifestyle, and the second one is psychosocial. And I'm going to say something on both of them. So when it comes to lifestyle, the first association that we have is the processed food, the easy access to this kind of food which have a very high concentration of energy and not always leads to satiety, and there is a lot to say on that, and certainly it's part of the problems. And just to say a few examples, if you remember when we were, most of us are a little bit older, so if you remember when we were children, Coca-Cola was something very specific, very special. You get it maybe once in a week if you're a good boy. I was not always, but and then it was 2.5 centiliter. Now you can have as much as you want sweet drinks and in large quantities, and the industry is of course motivated to sell these drinks, and that's for sure an important cause. And why I'm saying also about drink, because that if you look at obese individuals, especially severe obese individuals, it's often a very important and neglected source of sugar. And that's the first thing that we do when we change, when we advise for diet changes. But that's certainly part of the story, but it's not the whole story. And the question is really, is McDonald's or all these food really the problem? And there was one drug which for me was an eye-opener, that was rimonabant. And rimonabant is an endocannabinoid receptor blocker, and we will hear after that much more on that. But it was introduced as a drug already around 15 years ago. And it was a very effective drug, and patients lost weight, and also accordingly, if they had diabetes, the diabetes was improving. There was only a small problem with this drug. And the small technical problem was that patients started to make suicide. And that's the reason why the drug was retracted from the market. And to my knowledge, it's the only example that I'm aware that a drug was retracted from the market because people made suicide. And the question is why they made suicide. And we will hear certainly more after that. And we will also hear how you can avoid that, and there is much more progress in the between. But the hypothesis that is promoted is that these drugs work also on the mesolimbic system, and that's a rewarding system. And this system is a very interesting system and a very important system. Each of us is very dependent on positive rewarding. It starts already with a child. If a child has a small injury, if it hurts itself, the most important thing to do is to to give him some warmth, to speak with him, to hug, and so on. And that's what the child needs when he has its injury. And in adult is the same. If we are upset, if we have problems, if we have stress, what is most important are the social interaction, are the positive feedback that you get. And when we work, then we need somehow at certain time of a positive feedback. We are very dependent on this system. And there are people who have more difficult trouble, more stressful lives, and then they compensate with other ways to stimulate this rewarding system. And it can be alcohol, it can be cigarettes, and for those who could afford, there are also other stuff that are very efficient. And all of that is more and more not allowed anymore in our society. And the only drug that is still legal is the food. And if you look at many people, when they are under stress or when they do not well, they are compensating that with food. And just to say, yesterday evening I saw a film which I highly advise, The Whales, which is exactly explaining that someone who is not doing psychologically well and then compensate with food. And in German we say Fresssucht or Fettsucht. And I think Fettsucht. I think it's a very accurate word. It's really a dependency of food when you don't feel well. And I think this is a major cause of obesity. And if you look what people did before, when they didn't feel well, when they had problems, they took drugs. And many of you remember this picture from the Platzspitz. And long-term time, people said, yeah, that's just children, they are spoiled and whatever, and therefore they took drugs until there was a drug legalization. And then we had access to these people and realized that the reason why they're taking drug is just because of these deep psychological problems. And nowadays you don't have these drugs anymore, and the only legal drug which remains is food. This is one aspect of the lifestyle. The second aspect is the lack of activity. And here there are many cartoons that you can present. That's my preferred. It's somehow, there is no loss in the material. So what has been lost here from the television is going here in the fat tissue. And why I'm choosing that is there is a very strong correlation between time people are spending on front of screens and the level of obesity. And our life has become so much easier. We don't have to do any effort for anything, even if you have a dog, and that's a real picture. So the good news is that the dog will not get diabetes, but we are becoming more and more inactive. And if many years ago to get food we had to hunt and to be active, then today we can do everything with internet, and with COVID it has even increased. You really can do everything from home and you don't have to be active anymore. I love stairs, and if you have a building like that, then no question you will take stairs. But if you have a modern building, then sometimes you even don't see the stairs and you're not active, and so on. The whole daily life we become less and less active because everything is become easier. So this is the second aspect of why we have overweight problems. Now, just very short, a few words about overweight. I tried to explain you that many times overweight is caused by social problem, and especially in severe overweight people. If you really talk to these people, a large part of them had severe trauma. There are people after, I have a patient now, he was in Afghanistan and had to go through a lot of torture there, and is now compensating that with food. There are also numbers that 1/3 of the severe obese woman had sexual harassment as a child, and probably the best book, and if you take one thing from me today, is this book from Roxana Gay. From the literature, it's poorly written, but the story is very, very dramatic and very exemplifying that. She was, with the age of 12, very lean, and then she was badly raped by other children in the school, and from that on, she started to put on weight, and then people came and explained to her she should make an effort and so on, and didn't understand why she puts on weight. And she put on weight, one, to compensate her trauma, but also somehow to protect herself from being attractive. And I have an patient not long time ago, I sent her to bariatric surgery. She was very obese, and then at the last moment she refused. She said she doesn't want to become again attractive to men because that was the reason why she put on weight. So to say that people are very rapidly judging people who are overweight, and a lot of time there are stories behind that explain it. And there is really a stigma and a problem around overweight. And if you, for example, once for the employment, healthcare system, education, between children, and so on, all of that are negatively associated with overweight. And there has a lot of consequences which increase the problem of overweight, the shame that these people have. You will not see many severely overweight people in the restaurant, cinema and so on, but you will see them if you go to the clinic of overweight. Suddenly they exist, but they don't feel well, and they avoid to go out. So much for the stigma. Now about treatment. And here we have 3 treatments, and I will rapidly go over especially the 2 first. So one is lifestyles, the second we have better and better drugs, and the third one is surgery. And one of the things which is important when we speak about treatment is we eventually, most of us will die at a certain day, but every kilogram that you lose, and the longer you have less kilogram, the better you do for your health. So it's not to be lean and sometimes there are rebound and so on, but it's not a failure per se. It's just that some other things happen, but every kilo less you had will have a benefit. That is the concept. And the first thing that I want to place is about the lifestyle. And the lifestyle intervention, because also of all of what I said, is really something which works if you work interdisciplinary. And typically in most larger clinics where we are treating obesity, we have endocrinologists, nutritionists, sport physicians, for the reason I said before, and also psychologists. And one concept that I always like to place is that we should have a positive view on food. We need food. The other drugs we cannot. We can be without. We can be without cocaine or whatever. But food is a basic nutrient. Is something we need. And the point is about to have a positive way and use it positively. And what I'm saying with that is that a lot of time, if you look, because of all what I've explained, a lot of people who are overweight, they have a negative interaction at the end with the food. They just take that as a drug to compensate because they are not doing well. And they often, the very classical is, especially with severe overweight, they eat in a hidden manner when nobody is looking at, and eat very rapidly without enjoying food. And a lot of part of the treatment of overweight is that, and we give also course in Basel, for example, about how to cook and to take good food food and then take time to eat, enjoy the food, and not have this kind of food, but this one. And then if you have all the positive side of the food, then you need also much less food. So you take good products, take the time to prepare them, and already the smell will give you a certain level of satiety. And I'm always promoting that, and I have a physician in my clinic who tell me, yeah, that's something people like to hear, because you say they can eat, they can enjoy food, and that is what they want to hear, but there is no maybe scientific proof of that. But there is one that I found a few years ago, and in fact it's a study which was performed in Israel, and what they did in this study, they took a population of overweight patients and gave them two different interventions. And you see the both oops, what I have done. And you see both intervention. So here, during the intervention, both groups lose weight in a similar manner, but at the end of the study, some of the patients gain weight again, and the other one continue to lose. And what was the difference between both groups? They had exactly the same amount of calorie, but in one group, within the diet, in the morning, there was a piece of chocolate cake. So the whole day they had they had to restrict themselves. They were a little bit hungry, but the one with the chocolate cake, they knew tomorrow morning I receive my chocolate cakes, and the other one received biochemistry, or biochemistry is very good, or something like that, maybe not less attractive, at the end, and that is how I saw this study. It was in the newspaper, new diet, top of breakfast with chocolate cake. And the point is that the one who were without any cake, when they finished the study, then they jumped on the food, and they were so frustrated that probably they didn't take this piece but this one, and regain the weight. So just to show that if you have a positive access to food, if you know it's part of my diet, and you don't say I'm not allowed at all to have food, but you have a positive way, that is helpful. And if all of that is not benefit, there is a very famous article which appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine. That's the best journal we have in medicine, and there is a strong correlation between chocolate consumption and the number of Nobel Prize. And if you see in Switzerland, we are here. So at least if it's not good for your weight, it will be good for your mind. So enjoy chocolate. So that's one part of the lifestyle intervention. The second part is to exercise. And I've told you that it's important to have this positive rewarding system, and that is something you get when you do exercise. So the most difficult part in doing exercise is you put your shoes, but once you have your jogging shoes, then you go, you come back, and you feel much better. What is important to realize, especially at the beginning, your body weight may not decrease too much because you put on more muscle and decrease the fat, and then sometimes there is some disappointment when you look on the netto weight, but there is a healthier weight, of course. And it has a lot of beneficial effect, and in particular the one on the brain is something that I'm strongly always emphasizing, and by the way, it's also part of the antidepressant treatment, is that you do exercise. And that's a picture that is taken from our emergency room, and that's my enemy, I have to say. But we have placed here a very complicated engine, which is simply a home trainer. And when we have patients coming in the emergency room, first time they have diabetes, then symbolically we take them away from the bed and tell them that's your enemy, and your friend is the exercise, and we really show them how you can implement that. And because there is still quite skepticism around that, we have a small ongoing study where we really demonstrate that this first approach to the disease of diabetes is change in lifestyle, and then they believe it. If you start immediately by coming with insulin and things like that, then they believe in drug and don't believe in lifestyle intervention. That's to say that there is another myth which says that lifestyle intervention doesn't work. It does work. It's just a lot of aspects that you have to take into account, and I've tried to show you some of them. But if you take the time, and I have to say our health system is not very supportive for that. If I send someone to bariatric surgery, it costs around 20,000 francs. I have absolutely no problem. If I have an individual needing a nutritionist more than 12 times, then I start to write letter to the health insurance. But if we would put the same amount of money in lifestyle intervention than we do in other parts of the medicine, then we would have much more success. And in this sense, I'm very also happy that we have the newspapers helping us. And as was mentioned before, I'm currently accompanying a friend of mine who is losing weight. It started the whole, we had a beer together, and I told him in a certain context that he should also start to lose weight. And he say, why? I'm not so fat. And then we say, that's your opinion. And at the end, I could convince him that it would be a good idea that he lose weight. And I really recommend his series that he writes. And he really is a very serious journalist, and show also all the aspects that plays a role in lifestyle intervention. And he tested the drug that I'm going to mention now, but just to see what it does. But it was not the reason for his success, and he lost already now 12 kilograms in his an example among many other that lifestyle intervention works. But now, and I think that some of you are here, we do have very successful and very helpful drugs, and this is what I'm going now to say a little bit. The basis of these drugs is quite complex from this aspect, that there are many mechanisms in the body which control body weight. And in fact, that's the first one which has been successfully introduced, is a so-called glucagon-like peptide, GLP-1. They are not so new as people believe. We use them already since 2009 in Switzerland for diabetes, but why they are now a lot more in the newspaper is for many reasons. One of them is that a higher dose, it's now reimbursed since, in fact, 3 years. Only for obesity, so you don't need to have diabetes to get one of them. And the next one is going to be reimbursed also probably at the end of the year, which is Wegovy, but it's the same than another drug that is also on the market since several years, which is Ozempic. So most of them are injectable. Typically you inject them once a week if you take this category, which is the one we use more for obesity, especially when it will be reimbursed. There is also an oral form but it sounds attractive, but it's quite complicated. You have to take it, wait half an hour, and if you don't wait half an hour precisely, then everything is lost. But basically, these are the drugs that you've heard a lot. And I have to say that we always start with a lifestyle intervention, but once we see that we don't succeed, then we introduce this drug, and we make really good, have really good results with them. And basically what the drugs do is they increase the satiety. It's really the satiety hormone that you inject, and this is what the patient also reports a lot of time. For the first time of my life, I don't have this hunger all the time. And I've told you there is a genetic component, and specifically in these patients who are really genetically prone to obesity, they really enjoy that suddenly they don't have to fight the whole day against this hunger. And so that's a positive effect. The side effect or the negative effect are in fact part of the satiety hormone. What is satiety? When you eat a lot, then you feel full, and if you eat even more, then you may even have nausea or vomiting, and that is what the drug does. So the whole trick is, of course, to titrate them in such a way that you don't have this side effect, and that in most of the case feasible, and then we do, I said, see very good success with the drug. I have to say also that they are very safe. There is a lot of discussion, but now they are, I said, almost 15 years on the market, and we really don't see anything serious apart of these gastrointestinal symptoms, which are not worrisome. And here you see, I will not show you many studies, but just, and I'm almost finished, also don't get nervous. But you see here that's the semaglutide, the Ozempic or Wegovy, as it will be named for obesity, and you see over 2 years how the patient lose weight. But I have to add that in this study, like in every study, they started with lifestyle, and then on top of that, they gave the drugs. If you just take the drug and you don't do a lifestyle intervention, it really doesn't work. And that is what I want to say with this. It's a little bit like an electro bike. You still have to bike, but it's much easier if you have the drug. But if you don't bike, then you will not have any benefit. And he is just an example out of many, but this one was quite impressive. He came to me, it was in the middle of the lockdown, with 136 kilogram, new onset of diabetes. He was, he is a manager in Novartis, so the typical lazy people who explain everything to others, but are not ready to do something for themselves. And I told him to do lifestyle, and then he explained me, it was even raining, I remember very well this day, and he said, and there is COVID, he's afraid to go outside and to have the virus. But I insisted, and then he started to lose weight. And so the time he said, it just doesn't work. Then I added to him Ozempic, and 1 year later he came with 36 kilogram less. He's very tall, he's 195, so he was lean. And for the specialists among you, his diabetes, which is reflected by H1C, completely normalized. And he still continued to come to me. Now he comes always with jogging shoe and comes in like that, really another person, and that is one of the successes that we have with the drugs, and that's a very impressive one. With 36 kilograms is a lot, and before we had this drug, this kind of patient, we wouldn't be successful without bariatric surgery. Now, the topic is now, is it a lifestyle drugs? And there is a lot of negative press because of some of these people. Like Elon Musk and also Kim Kardashian take the drug, and I think it's not so bad, because at the end of the day, I prefer that someone takes the drugs before that he has a very heavy weight, and if for some reason he can control it, then be it, then take the drug, and it's much easier to prevent body weight increase than to treat body weight increase. And if you have some patient coming, we have sometimes patient with the most we had is 270 kilogram, that's someone we cannot help anymore. It's really, really then everything is damaged and so on. So I prefer prevention, and if it has to be also with this drug, they are safe, and okay, the industry will make some money, but they are making also money with other things. I'm not so emotional about that. And the argument which sometimes comes is it's taken away from the diabetic patient. So easy it's also not, and I can tell you that in Switzerland we don't have a shortage of the drug. So it's correct that now a lot of people, especially after Elon Musk took it, a lot of people try to have access to it, but there is a policy from the company which distributes it not to give too much at the one time, so that people don't make reserve or start a black market, and so that we do have enough drugs, and there will be a new drug coming, so I'm not so much worried. So just to finish about the future, the next one should also come at the end of the year. It's a so-called dual agonist. It's GIP and GLP-1, so another satiety hormone. It has, for some reason, even less side effect, which makes it very attractive and is extremely potent. So in studies, you lose their amount 25% of your body weight, which is in the range of bariatric surgery. And I always said there will be one day where the bariatric surgery will be something we don't need to do. Currently, we still need to do it, but it is mutilating a healthy gut to an unhealthy gut, and if we could avoid it, we would. In some cases of very severe obesity, we still do it, but I'm quite optimistic that with these drugs we will reach it, and if not, we have Yositam, and he will solve the problem. So with that, I thank you for your attention.
Hi everyone, it's a really great pleasure to be here and speak after you, Mark. It's a really honor. Nadia, I would like to thank you so much for the invitation. I'm coming from the Hebrew University, as you heard, and I will take the opportunity that was given to me here to share with you some findings about and knowledge about cannabis at the beginning, and how can we utilize the plant cannabis in order to develop new and maybe also effective medications to treat obesity and the metabolic syndrome. And since I come from the Holy Land, I would start by mentioning that the fact that cannabis, if you don't know, was first indicated in the Bible, in Sefer Shmot or Exodus. You can see here that it was called, I think, Kne Bosem, where is it? It just moved, or Calmus, but Kne Bosem was developed into cannabis. And if you would like to believe it or not, this is the first indication that cannabis was really present a very long time ago. But if we do look at the history of cannabis, the first indication of the use of cannabis came 12,000 years BC. By archaeological records of the use of hemp that was later developed into the medicinal use in China in 2700 BC, then religious use in India, that were followed by the first introduction of cannabis to the Western world, to European countries, basically during the 18th century, where cannabis has been used to treat mainly chronic pain, until aspirin has been generated. But a few obstacles during the 20th centuries basically limited the use of cannabis for medical, for recreational, and also for research purposes. First of all, in 1937 by the Marijuana Tax Act, which limit its commercial use, and later on by putting cannabis as a substance, one drug of abuse drug, which means that we cannot use it for any purposes. And if we go in the line of history, the first country to approve the use of cannabis for medicinal use was California in the United States. And since then, we can see how each country in the world basically creates its own program to use cannabis either for recreational or for medical use. But I would like to take this opportunity and the map of the world and take you to this small country in the Middle East, Israel, where I believe everything has started related to cannabis, at least in the past 60 years. And this is because one person who is called Professor Raphael Mechoulam. Raphael Mechoulam, when he was very young, discovered the structure of cannabinoids present in the plant, the psychoactive component, which is called THC, and the non-psychoactive, which is called CBD or cannabidiol. And these are two main cannabinoids that are present in the cannabis plant. Therefore, we call them phytocannabinoids. Raphael Mechoulam regretfully passed away 10 days ago, and I was blessed to work with him, to be mentored by him, to become a colleague and also collaborator. And he was actively involved, of course, in cannabis, but his vision to connect people together to work on this product of cannabis, this is really a huge success of him, because Raphael Mechoulam, he's considered the godfather of cannabinoid research all over the world, and this has come from the Hebrew University. He was the rector of the Hebrew University as well, and his discoveries during the 60s to identify these phytocannabinoids, basically it took 20 years from these initial discoveries to understand that if someone consumes cannabis, it basically modulates a specific area in the brain that was later on identified as the cannabinoid receptors. And to those of you who are not in the field of pharmacology and terminology that I'm using, so think about receptors as the lock and the cannabis as the key, and basically if you consume cannabis, it basically opens the lock or modulate the lock in a different way. And the cannabinoid receptors are called CB1 and CB2, and we have a lot of these receptors over our body, mainly in the central nerve system in our brain. CB1 receptor is the highest expressed receptor in the human brain. This is why when we consume cannabis with high level of THC, we immediately feel it. But also you can see that CB1 and also CB2 are present in different tissues. CB1 present also in adipocytes, in our fat, in the liver, in the skeletal muscle, in the kidney, and CB2 are present more or less in the immune system. So we do have these locks and the receptors for cannabis in our body, but does it mean that we need to basically smoke cannabis? I guess not. Because if we have these receptors in our body, they are probably there because our body produces compounds that mimic the effect of cannabis. And these discoveries were also made by Professor Mechoulam, that he identified the endocannabinoids. Endo, which means in our body, versus the phyto coming from the plant. So the endocannabinoids are basically molecules that each cell and organ in our body produce, and they activate or modulate the cannabinoid receptors in a similar fashion like we consume basically cannabis. And all together, The endocannabinoid and the cannabinoid receptors are basically what we call the endocannabinoid system. And the endocannabinoid system is one of the main important physiological systems of our body that basically regulates many activities, including the digestive system, the endocrine system, the nervous system, all together may be linked to Mark's presentation that may regulate our food consumption, our weight, and others. So the endocannabinoid system may have a potential to treat the metabolic syndrome. And as Mark mentioned, the metabolic syndrome is an array of different clinical conditions, including obesity and hypertension and fatty liver disease and chronic kidney disease, diabetes, of course, dyslipidemia, and even cancer. And these are growing problems worldwide, yet there is a lack of effective medication, although GLP-1 agonists are clearly a good option nowadays. And basically, we should ask ourselves how cannabis or cannabinoids can modulate our body shape and weight. And to answer this question, I brought a short movie, but before I present to you this movie, I would like also to mention that cannabinoids or cannabis can modulate different physiological actions. You can see it here, but for today's talk, I highlighted several of them in red, and we can sure say that if we consume cannabis or we activate our endogenous cannabinoid system, it makes us relax, eat, drink, rest, sleep, save and store, and conserve energy. And if we think about even further, all these effects are the hallmark of what we call the thrifty phenotype. It's the same phenotype that helped humans survive evolution during frequent period of starvation. However, in our Western society of abundant food supply and sedentary lifestyle, these effects became the main cause in the epidemic spread of obesity, diabetes, dyslipidemia, fatty liver disease, which means that there is an overactivation of the endocannabinoid system. Our body produces many cannabinoids that probably activate the cannabinoid receptors and triggers weight gain. And how can we manipulate it then? So let's watch the movie and the story of Daniel Lay.
One San Francisco Girl Scout is proving a shrewd businesswoman, making money off the munchies. The Green Cross, a marijuana dispensary, posted photos to its Facebook page this week of 13-year-old Danielle Lay selling her Girl Scout cookies outside its doors.
After 45 minutes, she had to call for reinforcement cookies, backups. And her mother was quoted saying that she sold about 117 boxes in 2 hours.
Danielle and her mom did not want to be interviewed on TV, but Danielle's mom told KPIX she thought this was a good opportunity to both show her daughter different areas of their city and to have a mature conversation about drugs. The East Bay Express quotes Carol, "The girls learn that users are not drugged out. Many have serious needs and are just a little different. And they get very hungry after," said Danielle. Yes, a lesson about pot, but Danielle's marijuana money move is also getting her praise as brilliant, savvy, even genius. We're just surprised there's not a dude at the end of some of these headlines. KPIX spoke with the Girl Scouts of Northern California, and they're fine with where Danielle set up her stand. She will be back at the Green Cross Saturday, and some of the money made off of selling her cookies will go to research for Alzheimer's. For Newsy, I'm Lauren Zima.
So, what do we learn from Daniel's story? Three stuff. First, we need to listen to our parents, right? Second, that location in life is very important. And the third one is that cannabis increases the munchies, right? It increases overfeeding, and it may or may not drive obesity. I will let you know at the end, but therefore, we cannot probably use THC because THC activates the CB1 receptor and triggers eating. It's also a psychoactive compound. We don't want to stone our patient. So how do we develop drugs that are based on this knowledge in order to treat the obesity epidemics? So there are 3 different ways to create drugs based on cannabis. First of all, to take the entire plant and to create whole plant products. The second one is to use a single molecule in the plant or single molecules that can be developed into a drug. And the third option is to use synthetic cannabinoids or pharmaceutical grade cannabinoids. And I will highlight each and every pathway that is just described. Here we'll start with the whole plant product. And then we need to ask ourselves, okay, so how many cannabis strains are basically there? Originally, we had 3 different strains. We had the sativa, the indica, and ruderalis, and by different hybrids, we created the medical marijuana or medical cannabis. Sativa was developed into hemp, but this is what happened originally. But currently, in fact, and in practice, there are hundreds of different species, if not thousands, in the world today that basically they are the creation of weird hybrids between the sativa and the indica, and there is no way to track which one is good for what. And this variety basically create something amorphous, something that is very unlikely to be developed as a drug. We are clinicians. We are looking to a very well-designed drug, and maybe using of cannabis could not be achieved, at least not like that. And this is if we considered only THC and CBD. But look, in the plant of cannabis, there are more than 140 different cannabinoids. Not only THC and CBD, and there are terpenes and flavonoids and other fatty acids and amino acids. So how can we design a proper drug based on whole plant product, which means we take the flower and we extract and give it to our patient? This is probably not going to be the very good drug to treat any other diseases, not just obesity. So we need to turn into the second option, which is a single molecule or molecules in the plant that we may or may not use. And for this, we know from Danielle's story that we don't want to use THC because it's psychoactivity and increases munchies. So which other cannabinoids can we utilize? The CBD is the main cannabinoids except for THC, but there are other minor cannabinoids. And in fact, CBD extract, only CBD, has just approved by the FDA to treat rare conditions of epilepsy. And when CBD has been tested in different clinical settings in patients, it was reported to reduce appetite in 28% of the population that took CBD. And it has also ability to improve weight loss and has anti-inflammatory effect. And we know that obesity is an inflammatory disease, and it's a non-psychoactive. So CBD is one option. But what about other cannabinoids? For example, cannabigerol. Cannabigerol is, or CBG, is another molecule present in the plant that can be utilized to treat different diseases. However, there is no knowledge about it. So we in the lab, in my lab, ask the same question. Can we take CBD and or CBG to treat the metabolic syndrome? And I would like to introduce you our model. So I'm working with animals, with mice. We take mice, we give them for 14 weeks either standard diet or high-fat diet. High-fat diet is 60% of fat. Think about eating McDonald's every day, all day long, okay, for 14 weeks. And then after they become that obese, we treat them with any type of drug for 28 days. And then we do all the analysis. So we did the same study with CBD and CBG, but surprisingly, we didn't see a lot of effect. Neither CBG nor CBG reduces weight. You can see here the obese animals remain obese. These are the lean animals that receive just the placebo. Let me go over these graphs. So these are the standard diet fed animal. These are the obese. and the treatment animals. So you can see here fat mass that was measured by MRI. High-fat diet fed animals, obese animals, have much more fat. However, we were not able to significantly affect the fat mass with any of the treatment. But when we look at other parameters, for example, diabetes, we found that the drugs were very effective. They reduced hyperglycemia and also glucose tolerance test, and also reduced the level of insulin, so improving insulin sensitivity. The drugs were also, CBD and CBG, were able to reduce the triglyceride in the blood, they're reducing the bad cholesterol, LDL, and also the cholesterol, the total cholesterol. And more significantly, the drugs were able to clear or to reduce the fat in the liver. You can see here the hepatic triglyceride levels, which are very high in obese animals, but with the drugs, they are significantly reduced, also cholesterol, but you can see it clearly, much clearly, in this histological section of the liver. You can see how an animal that is fed with high-fat diet basically have a lot of fat in the liver. You can see here the red bubbles, and with the treatment with CBG or CBD, the liver basically looks very, very clean from fat, suggesting that CBD and CBG, either separately or together, may have beneficial effect, and we try to sort out the mechanism of action nowadays in the lab. But I would like to switch gear and also show you two different examples of synthetic cannabinoids, which are more pharmaceutical grade option to treat the metabolic syndrome. And I would start again with CBD and educate you that CBD in the plant is not present as a CBD. It is present as a cannabidiolic acid. There is an acid here that by heating, by smoking, it basically induces decarboxylation. The acid is removed and we create CBD. Now the cannabidiolic acid, the acid form of CBD, is unstable molecule. So what we did together with Professor Meshulam, the late Professor Meshulam, we designed a novel molecule which is much more stable by introducing here a different chemical entity. And we created a novel CBDA analog, which is much more stable and has been shown to not only treat obesity, but also depression and anxiety. And when we gave this EPM 301, or CBDA-O-methyl ester, as we call it officially, the EPM 301 to our obese animals, we found that it reduces weight significantly in the animals. It was much more potent. It reduced fat mass, and also improve the release of different enzymes that are related to hepatic damage, to liver damage. Moreover, the drug, EPM 301, was able to reduce hepatic triglyceride levels. Look at the liver of obese animal with a lot of fat inside, but here, basically, clearance of the fat in the liver by EPM 301, but also reducing circulating or blood levels of triglycerides and also cholesterol. So this is very encouraging data with diet-induced obesity. So if we eat a lot of fat, the drug is effective. But what about other forms of obesity, such as genetic forms of obesity? And here I would like to introduce you another disease, which is called Prader-Willi syndrome. And Prader-Willi syndrome is a rare genetic disorder that is basically created or generated by the loss of these different genes on chromosome 15. And the problem of these patients that suffer from these mutations, that they basically cannot stop eat. They are overeaters, they hyperphagic, as we call it, and they become morbidly obese patients that there is no way to treat them unless you give them a very low-caloric diet. And this is a huge problem, and we have a mouse model for this condition in the lab, and we took our novel drug, the EPM 301, and we decided to do a preventive study to start very early, before the animals become obese, and treat the animals for 18 weeks. And what we found, that EPM-301 was able to reduce body weight gain in these animals, fat mass, and also to restore muscle mass in these Module2 knockout mice, which are the mouse model for PWS, suggesting that EPM-301 altogether has really impressive ability to treat diet, but also genetic-induced obesity. And we now taking it further into clinical evaluation. And the third example that I would like to bring to you today, before I finish, is another synthetic drugs that are being developed based on the knowledge that we acquired in the lab. But this time I would like to talk about the receptor, the lock that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, the CB1 receptor. I mentioned that it is present all over our body in many cells, many tissues. But what also we know that if one consumes either fatty or diabetogenic diet, there is overactivation of the endocannabinoid system. CB1 is being overactivated both in the brain but also in many peripheral organs that triggers overfeeding and obesity and fat mass, suggesting that we need to block this specific receptor. And indeed, a French company called Sanofi, designed a molecule, as Mark mentioned, called rimonabant or Acomplia. And rimonabant was designed as a novel blocker for CB1 receptor, for the cannabinoid receptor. It was tested in humans, a human clinical trial. It was found very, very efficacious, even considered a wonder pill that reduces weight and keep it off for a long period of time. However, as Mark mentioned, people started to also report anxiety and depression and suicidality ideation, which basically limited the use of rimonabant, and the company had to withdraw it from the market. And not only rimonabant and Acomplia did it, you can see Merck, Pfizer, Bristol Myers, and all others that developed rimonabant-like compounds decided to take them out from development and from the shelf, suggesting that we may not use CB1 blockers. But as I mentioned, CB1 receptor also present in other tissues, not only in the brain. For example, in the fat, in the liver, in the kidney, in muscle, in pancreas, in the gastrointestinal tract. And if you activate the CB1 receptor in this tissue, basically there is fat accumulation and development of fibrosis and reduction in insulin sensitivity, suggesting that maybe we should block the receptor only in these peripheral organs without penetrating the brain. And I took this initiative, and since I'm a pharmacologist by training, I always like to cite Sir James Black, who won the Nobel Prize in 1988, who was also Scottish pharmacologist. And he said that the most fruitful basis for discovery of a new drug is to start with an old drug. And this is exactly what we did. We took the rimonabant, the drug that was abandoned, and all the other rimonabant-like compound, and we change it. We change the molecule in a way that we introduce different moieties into the molecule to reduce the penetration of the drug to the brain. And we started our journey with over 1,000 different compounds, and we screened them and selected them based on their ability to penetrate or not to penetrate the brain, etc. And we ended up with 5 to 10 different molecules. And I would like to show you one molecule, which is called BNS822. And look, when I give this molecule to an obese animal, to these high-fat diet animals, his weight is reduced significantly, almost 20% of the weight reduction we can see in mice. And these mice continue to eat fatty diet, not like humans that you do also lifestyle intervention. It reduces food intake, and it also reduces fat mass and increased lean mass, muscle mass. It also improved glycemic control. And BNS822 has also the ability to reduce fatty liver disease. You can see here the reduction in fat in the liver by this drug, and also improvement in liver enzyme, suggesting that this drug is very efficacious. And if I started my presentation telling you that the metabolic syndrome is an array of different clinical conditions, we now know that if we block CB1 receptor only in peripheral organs without penetrating the brain, we have the ability to treat obesity and dyslipidemia and diabetes and hepatocellular cancer and kidney diseases and osteoporosis and fatty liver disease. And when we develop drugs, I'm a pharmacologist, and drug development, it's a lengthy process. It starts with the initial idea that we take into preclinical evaluation in cells and then in mice. It takes 6 years to complete. Then an IND, investigational of a new drug, is being submitted to the FDA to start clinical trials, phase 1, 2, and 3. That takes another 6 to 7 years until an NDA is submitted to the FDA to say, okay, we have a drug. Only 1% of the drug will reach this point that you can get in the pharmacy. It takes almost between $1 billion to $2.5 billion to develop a drug and almost 16 years to complete. I'm happy to share with you, for example, that the first example that I gave you, the phytocannabinoids, CBG and CBD, are currently under the end of the preclinical evaluation. With the EPM 301, the synthetic cannabidiolic acid derivative, we just received 2 weeks ago an orphan drug designation from the FDA to start clinical trials for Prader-Willi syndrome, for the syndrome that I just showed you. And with the peripherally restricted CB1 compound, we are now starting phase 2 clinical trials. So maybe at the end, we will introduce cannabinoid-based medication that Mark can prescribe to his patients in the future. And with that, I will finish my presentation. First of all, I will thank my very talented group of young students in my lab. You can see we prepare the food and don't eat it to keep lean. And funding institution, very important to fund all this research. And of course, I would like to thank you for the kind attention, and we will start, I guess, the open discussion. Thank you so much.
So, hello. Thank you for these 2 excellent talks. For Professor Donat for really covering the whole spectrum of aspects associated with weight and obesity, and for Professor Tam for introducing us into the fascinating world of cannabinoids. So they show these talks that the discussion on obesity and diabetes has really changed. Up till very recently, obesity, too much weight, was kind of considered a failure of, or a poor lifestyle, or a failure of willpower. Now we're beginning to see that all these drugs that are able to actually treat this chronic biological disease. So that'll be interesting to follow up. We're going to now start, maybe just to give you the schedule, we're going to discuss a couple of questions that have come up in these talks. That'll be about 30 or 40 minutes. After that, we'll open up the discussion to the audience and take a couple of questions. And we need to be finished at the latest around 7:15. So, just for your information. So first, I'd like to introduce Jürg Gertsch. Nadia already briefly introduced him. Jürg Gertsch is professor of pharmaceutical biology and biochemistry. And perhaps what Nadia didn't mention is that he also has a background in cultural anthropology. So my first question, he also works on cannabinoids. And I believe that the 2 of you have actually been collaborating for the past several years. Yeah. So my first question to you, Professor Gertsch, is listening to these 2 talks, they seem like completely different approaches. the hyped drugs at the moment, the GLP-1 drugs that Professor Donat introduced, and the cannabinoid system, they both lead to weight loss. They both decrease hunger. But from the outside, it just seems like very different. So my question is there actually a biological mechanism that connects these two? Or do they just happen to have the same effect on the body?
Okay, thank you very much for introducing me, and it's a great pleasure to be here, and of course to meet Yossi. We have been collaborating on the endocannabinoid system for many years, and I'll take this question, which is a very difficult one, because I could give you a very simple answer. Of course, I could say it's a biological network, everything is connected with each other, and therefore there is a connection. There is certainly not a known direct connection, however, there is a connection indeed. What you said, that both drugs inhibit the hunger, I think that is a bit of a problem with the endocannabinoid system, because if you have this drug in the brain, it does do that, but I'm not so sure whether that would also happen when you just do it in the periphery. There you would see maybe the weight loss. In the case of the GLP-1, as far as I understand, you also have a suppression of the hunger, so you don't eat that much. And in the case of the endocannabinoid system, what you want is to have a lot of endocannabinoids in the brain. It's generally good, because they don't act like THC that make you high. It's a endogenous system. It's a good system. Generally, to have endocannabinoids help you to be resilient. You can cope with stress much better. So the things that we heard when you are chronically stressed, that you might overeat, that you could actually reduce by having this system activated in the brain. So that's one thing. The other is in the periphery. There is a very strong anti-inflammatory component by blocking CB1 receptors in the periphery and activating CB2, actually, that would be perfect, which is superior probably to the GLP-1 phenomenon, and therefore they would add together, they would probably maybe have super additive effects, is something we don't know. And I believe complex disease like that would require more than one drug. We have heard it's a lifestyle problem also. So when you're running, for example, you activate endocannabinoids in your body in the brain, so you feel good. You don't necessarily feel hungry, so it's a balance between these two things. I believe it's very interesting what also you showed. One drug might not do the job. You have shown a combination, it's already better. So what about the cocktail of 3 drugs that are rationally understood, rather than cannabis as a complex mixture which we probably never understand? So maybe it's like with cancer, that one drug is not enough. Maybe it's a cocktail of 3 different independent things that act together, what we also call network pharmacology.
But one thing that just comes up is, you mentioned the CBD. THC increases hunger,
right.
You mentioned, yes. Right? But when you think of like the typical pot smoker, they're not fat.
Right. That's the paradox, right? So I would not suggest you to smoke pot and cannabis chronically, but it's interesting that if you acutely or one time uses cannabis with high THC, it will increases your feeding. But if one is being exposed to cannabis over and over and over, it basically, the receptor that I just described to you, the CB1 receptor, is probably desensitized. It is down-regulated because it always sees this THC coming and would like to activate it. And basically, it is down-regulated, so it's mimic like we block the receptor, and therefore we get the positive effect of mediated through the down-regulation of the receptor, and not because we are consuming cannabis. This is the pharmacological explanation for the effect that we see. But indeed, chronic users with cannabis are lean, their blood glucose levels is controlled. However, they a bit stoned, right?
May I say something? Because you are very provocative with that. I don't necessarily agree with everything.
That's perfect.
Because I think that there's people who smoke, they also smoke nicotine because they mix probably the flowers together with nicotine, and smoking generally is known to have an impact on weight, management. So people who stop smoking generally take on weight, but you're the specialist, Mark, you can say something about that. And that goes through the autonomous nervous system. So the adrenaline is somehow, the sympathetic nervous system is increased. It would be like taking amphetamine or ephedrine and things like that. You rather lose weight. And I wonder, can you be sure that when you combine now the classical tobacco with cannabis, that actually it is superior? And that is the explanation that why there is not so many very fat people who are smoking cannabis? Or could it be that actually the people who are taking on weight already have a very good endocannabinoid system and the stress management, and they don't want to smoke, because they already have it internally. They compensate it by eating, they increase the endocannabinoid system, and the others, they smoke, and they do it synthetically, or like with plants.
So you may be right, or I may be right. Let's agree that it's a complex, but the connection between nicotine and cannabinoids and weight gain has not been solved yet, so we don't have the proof for it. I'm looking at it as a pharmacologist, so I'm looking about the interaction between the ligand and the receptor. You took it differently, a different perspective. But
I agree that in the fat there is, I think there is about 100 times more in the fat cells where the CB1 receptors have 100 times more THC than in the brain. So it's very well possible that it's desensitized also. So maybe it's also one reason why they don't, because they should take on weight, if they activate the CB1 receptor, but this is not happening.
Definitely.
Okay, well, we'll just have another question on the cannabinoids before we go on over to the other drugs. Those GLP-1 drugs, actually, they took about 10 to 15 years from the initial idea to the market, I guess. So you just, in the last slide, you showed that it takes like 6 or 7 years for it to come to the market. So are you expecting, with your first clinical trials there, I don't know, in 10 years, we're going to have the cannabis drugs on the market?
I hope so. Definitely to treat metabolic disorders. For sure, cannabinoids in general and cannabis products are reaching the market very soon. One drug, as I mentioned, is already approved to treat rare conditions of epilepsy, was approved by the FDA, very potent and efficacious, and I believe that there will be more and more drugs based on cannabis or cannabinoids. I hope that our drugs developed at the Hebrew U will become also blockbuster in one time. Yeah?
The next blockbusters.
Definitely, I hope so.
So wait, let's talk briefly about the current blockbusters that everybody's talking about, the GLP-1 drugs. Mark Donat, you said that there's no shortage, or at least in Switzerland there's no shortage, but basically if you had to treat all the obese people in this world, in Switzerland, it's, I think, 11% of the population. In the US, it's almost 40% of the population. Is that really feasible to treat them? And the other thing is, who should be getting these drugs? Here in Switzerland, we have very strict regulations, apparently. If you could maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, first, if you allow me 2 comments of what was said before. First of all, the GLP-1s are very successful drugs, but not every patient is responding. So therefore, we need other approach. So it's not only the combination, which I would be optimistic that it will be potent, but we have non-responder. That's the first thing. Second thing is how fast it will be on the market. I'm an optimistic, and I would say it will not take as long as the GLP-1, for the reason also that now there is an understanding that obesity needs a drug treatment, and for the GLP-1 they enter through a completely different angle from diabetes, and at the beginning it was a drug for improving insulin secretion, and it ended to be an anti-obesity drug, and now the people and the authorities have realized that we need an anti-obesity drug. Now, are we going to treat the whole humanity or one third of the humanity? I think there are two aspects here. As I've tried to show, it is a civilization problem, and it's a kind of epidemic, and no epidemic has been solved without prevention. So still our main focus is to understand the lifestyle and to change them, and as I've tried to explain, there is many psychosocial, it's not by chance that lower income, social, less privileged people have more tendency to obesity. So all these aspects need to be worked, and it's a little bit like an other epidemic. The first thing is prevention. So for if you take AIDS, the major thing is prevention of AIDS, but still we do prevention, but we still have a lot of patients who have, and for this patient we'll still need the drugs. So that's a general view. Now around the shortage of drug, many countries are in a short-term shortage, but if there is a business, then the production will grow up, and they are building now a lot of facilities, and the shortage in other countries will not last long. But the problem is it's still quite an expensive drug, and not everyone can afford it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read an article about the US where Eli Lilly, I think with this newest drug, they offered this kind of coupon savings, how do you say, Aktion for obese patients for $25 a month. And of course, lots of obese people came in and took it. And then after 3 months, they said, okay, this coupon savings is over now. We're going to charge the 1,500 or 1,200 francs. And all these obese people are kind of like hooked on the drug, but no longer able to pay it. So what you said, I wonder whether there's not too much of a fixation on the biological cure to this. I mean, you say that there's, a whole lifestyle intervention, but if you look at what's out in the media, I think probably not everybody has time and money to actually follow this holistic lifestyle intervention, and it is a very biological quick fix, right?
Yeah, and to add to what you say, also in Switzerland, for the time being, the first anti-obesity drug, so Saxenda, is approved for 3 years, and after that, in principle, you should stop. And now there is a huge negotiation with the Bundesamt für Gesundheit to promote a prolonged reimbursement. And the point is that the authorities have to realize that it is a chronic disease for all the reasons that I've said, but not the least the genetic also predisposition. And like if you have a thyroid underfunction, you need lifelong replacement of your thyroid, or if you have hypertension, you need lifelong. So I think the view is that for many patients, it will be not for everyone, but for a large part, it will be a lifelong, and this manipulative thing that you said with Eli is not ethical, and that's business like it is in the US. But I think that there will be a major investment in anti-obesity drugs, but the payback is that you will have less of the complication of that. And if you look netto, the benefit and from the drug and the cost of cardiovascular disease and all what we have said, the benefit is toward the drugs.
Okay, so you say that basically lifelong, because if you stop taking them, you regain the weight.
So according to studies, yes. And in every study, when they stopped, there was a rebound. Anecdotal, there are many patients who do manage after having lost weight to keep it. And I have some patients that keep it 2-3 years, and that's the longest I have. And then suddenly it comes back, then it takes the drug again, and then they go back. So it will be a little bit of individual, but I think we have to see it as a chronic disease and accordingly chronic intervention.
Okay. What about the...
Right, but if I may add, so definitely each anti-obesity drug should be coupled with lifestyle intervention. Without that, it will not be able to do what we expected it to do. And even bariatric surgeries, they have this rebound effect because our body, trying to counteract the changes, physiological and metabolic changes that we induce exogenously by any intervention that we are playing. And if we are not keeping our lifestyle to change dramatically, then all these treatments will not be efficacious.
Including the cannabinoids?
Yes, yes, everything.
They will also rebound if you stop taking them, let's say, once they're on the market?
Definitely, because each one of us has a different threshold or set of metabolic energy homeostasis, and it really depends how do we manipulate it from exogenously administered drugs, and if we don't really allow the body to react and to get to a new set, a new balance, and leave it for a long period of time, then we will regain.
Okay, so what about, I mean, that's lifestyle interventions. What about if you look at political issues? I mean, after all, we're living in a society where food is here all the time. We have to work all the time, so we sit in front of the computers. We don't have time to go take breaks and so on. Are there political instruments? I mean, one of the big topics are sugar taxes. What do you three think about sugar taxes?
In Switzerland, right? Because in Israel, it has been...
It was revoked, I heard.
Yeah, right?
But there was one.
There was one, and now the government has been changed, and now they decided to basically bring it back to what it was before. But you may take the lead on this.
Go ahead first. Well, I think we can afford to pay more for sugar because we love it a lot. And what is problematic is the hidden sugars where the sugar doesn't relate to the taste perception anymore. So there's a lot of food products that don't taste sweet, but there is a lot of sugar inside because in our brain it will give a reward and we will buy this product again. So even if it's a spicy, whatever savory sauce, it might have a lot of sugar, and there are many such products. And I think that's a problem. Just to tax it, they will just increase accordingly the sauce, but we will nevertheless like it. So maybe it's about regulating food industry rather than taxing it, but that's my opinion.
And so first I have a small anecdote on that. On the cigarettes, you have this saying that if you smoke, you will get cancer. And they had that for many, many years all over the world, and in fact it didn't help at all. So just in Italy once they've put, if you have cigarettes, you will have erections problem. And then a young person came and say, don't you have the one with the cancer? I prefer this one. But what I want to say with that is that I think it's a certain level of naivety that the politicians have around that it is just a question that you can solve with money. I think it's really a whole approach that you need to change to the food. And I spoke about legalizing food. Butter is something wonderful, and sweet cake is also something wonderful. You just need to learn to have it in such a way that you enjoy it and that you have a positive way. So a little bit of it can make sense if, for example, the sweetened drinks, but what seems to be more efficient is to lower simply the amount of sugar you have that, and that 7 countries did that, and at the beginning people don't like it, but then they get use of it, and that's part of the approach to the food, and that's something very interesting. If you tell to someone to drink coffee without sugar, and he's used to that, at the beginning he will not like it. After 2 weeks he will be used, and then he doesn't like anymore the sweet coffee because he feels it's too sweet. So I think these kind of interventions are much more efficient, and I think it's naive to think that if you just tax the food you will solve it.
So that's kind of like what you're saying, that you have to regulate.
I think I have a follow-up question to you. these sweet drinks, which in Mexico, for example, has caused the dramatic increase of metabolic syndrome in young people because they have been given sweet drinks rather than water, this has exploded. I wonder, is there a law that sets a high level, like, are you allowed to add as much sugar as you want into a drink as long as people don't revoke to it? Yeah. Is that, or is it regulated? Do you know that?
As far as I know, until now it's not regulated, but it's very interesting. The humans are used to a certain level of glucose. So if you look, most drinks, they have around 10 grams of glucose per 100 milliliter, and it can be orange juice or it can be Coca-Cola. And just by the way, orange juice is not better than Coca-Cola. Sure. It's a kind of something that people like. But what is more problematic is also, if we go a little bit into details, it's sometimes the glucose or the sucrose has been changed to fructose, and fructose is much cheaper, and you have much less satiety. And now we come in manipulation of the industry. I think it's true because I have heard that from 3 different sources, that at a certain time Coca-Cola had an issue with McDonald's because they were working together, and after these refill that you have in the US, people were drinking so much Coca-Cola that they were not eating any McDonald's anymore. And then there was really a crisis, and then Coca-Cola changed and introduced fructose in the Coca-Cola so that the satiety was less and the people will drink the Coca-Cola and have the hamburger. So everyone was happy, the Coca-Cola, the McDonald's, and the endocrinologist, because we had more patients.
Okay, right. That's kind of problem, yeah, okay. But just, you mentioned in one of your slides, you said the drugs, we have no more drugs. No more drugs are allowed except for food. That's a little bit an overstatement, I guess, because we do have a lot of drugs around. But coming back to the history of obesity, as far as I understand, the obesity pandemic really took off in the 1980s, first in the US and then in the other high-income countries, and then in the rest of the world. What happened there?
But maybe I didn't express myself. There is no more legal drugs. So and there is a lot of speculation what happened. But I believe that is one of the sources really that people were fighting against the cigarettes, put on taxes and so on, and didn't realize why the people are taking cigarettes. And this is what I try to say, that there is a need for addiction. And if you take one drug, then the people will go to the next one, and the only one which is really still legal is the food. And you can try to forbid it, but then it will come to something else. This is what I was trying to say, and I think that is one explanation. There is another one, but maybe less interesting to go to the details, but there is a kind of, if the mother is obese, the chance that the child will be even more obese is increasing, and it's a kind of increasing feature, and that has many biological explanations for that, epigenetics and so on. So that's the other part of the explanation. But for me, that's one of the explanations is really that the population needs, which doesn't do well, needs something, and if you take them one drug, they will go to the next one.
But haven't we other problematic issues with alcohol and nicotine still, which is still legal, and both can give you a reward, so you can actually have this good feeling coming from dopamine in the system they have shown. How is that correlated to obesity? Is people who drink a lot, are they less obese? Is there any study about that? Or following your logic, I mean, with the nicotine, it's known.
That's it. With nicotine, it's very clear. Yes. And with the decrease of nicotine, you immediately see decrease of obesity. And I think that is part of the explanation. And alcohol is still legal, but too much less, and you're also not allowed to drive anymore with alcohol. So all of that have make some shift. I'm not saying it's a whole explanation. I think also the lifestyle that we have also is still increasing, and you can do every day less. You need less activity than before. So it's a complex factor. And I wouldn't say it was like that and then it came like that. So it's all these factors.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But you both touch the reward system, and you mentioned it. And why do we need this reward? Because during the last years, the stress in our life has increased dramatically, and with that stress, the epidemic spread of obesity has been, of course, expanded. You can see also during COVID what happened to obesity percentage-wise in different countries, and so the stress also contributes to the fact that we are overeating ourselves, and in order to enjoy and to cover or to reward ourselves with food.
Or is it hedonism? Hedonistic behavior would be you take pleasure in life. So we are used to have a very pleasant, pleasurable life. Mm-hmm. It's promoted heavily by, say, our society. In the past, maybe it was memento mori, so you just were trying to survive, and then you knew you're going to die soon, so it's not much pleasure. And now it's clear that we have evolved to be very happy, and we take pleasure in everything, and we overdo it because it's become an industry. Is that not also an aspect that we don't have sort of limits now? Or
I think it's part, but the fact that lower socioeconomic people, and especially the people who have more stress life, tend much more to obesity, speaks a little bit more in other direction. And to the COVID, it was very interesting, at least in our setting, we analyzed that in more detail. And in fact, we had some people who lose a lot of weight during COVID, and other one who increased a lot. Mm-hmm. And the one who lose were typically the people stressed, and they didn't have to go at work and had time, because it takes time. That's also something I didn't mention. If you want to lose weight, you need time. You need to have this leisure, you have sport and so on. So at the end, in Basel, it was netto zero, but the variation was much increased.
Okay. Interesting. But then these drugs, if you have these quick fixes, the people who can afford it, who have time, are able to lose weight with them. That may actually increase the health gap between the well-off and the not well-off.
I don't know, it will increase the health gap, because at the end it depends on the country. So in a country like Switzerland, or Israel, where everyone has access to drugs, I don't think it will increase the health gap.
Okay, but in the US
for sure.
Where it already is very
But we cannot help them, sorry.
Right. We can't help them, okay. So let's still talk about stigma before we open up, before you actually talk about the cannabinoids one more time. But let's talk about stigma. You mentioned that stigma in obese people is a big topic, but some people actually fear that these new drugs could actually increase stigma, because as somebody wrote, these drugs fix weight stigma by making you thinner instead of removing stigma. So.
Yeah, so it's, of course, not a reason not to treat people because you want to increase stigma, but I think, and we are trying to do that, to sensitize people that it is not, and starting by the health authorities, that it is not a simple, like people think it's laziness, or it's really something more complex. But you could also say the fact that you need a drug shows that there is more than that. It is really a disease and not just bad will and so on. So therefore, it's a risk, but we have to work against the stigma.
Mm-hmm. Okay, coming back to the cannabinoids, you showed very nicely how all these receptors are all over in our brain. Right. That we have this endocannabinoid system. So just eating healthily, just food apparently also work on those receptors in different ways. So apparently those fatty foods are actually very bad for those receptors. Could you find a diet that actually helps you get high normally without any drugs, or actually help you lose weight just by eating the right food?
Shall I answer?
Yeah,
I mean, it's something we are very much interested
in working on it.
We have actually a potential grant proposal that we're going to hopefully submit soon on monkeys.
Monkeys?
Yes, with a collaborator where we look exactly at that food pattern and stress and so forth. And yes, there is indication, of course, that these endocannabinoids are synthesized also dependent on our food. So if you eat healthy food, generally the system is working very well. It has also been evolved in the context of food. You are what you eat. That is very clear, and it's definitely proven in the endocannabinoid system that what you eat has an impact on the system, and there are certain food types that are healthier than others. So also for fats, I mean, it's clear that you know about this omega-3 and omega-6 that has a big impact and somehow supports that notion. And also you have, it's very interesting, in spices that we are using, there are cannabinoid compounds that somehow are anti-inflammatory. They have, in a way, a positive effect in the periphery. Whether they reach the brain, that's hard to say, but because it's not known, but in the periphery it might happen. So there are probably a lot of interactions between what you eat. And there is now this whole new dimension of the microbiota, so what you have in the gut, the bacteria, they also influence, and the system is very active there as well. But Yossi, you might have something to add to that.
No, I would just add that my presentation contained only simplified version of the endocannabinoid system, and presenting only two endocannabinoids, anandamide and 2-AG, which are derivative of one of the main fatty acids in our body called arachidonic acid, but the endocannabinoid system contains large amount of endocannabinoid-like molecules. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, and we are now exploring their different effects, because each one of them is a derivative of, is being a derivative of different fatty acids. And like fatty acids, it's a huge family of molecules that may or may not act in a similar fashion, so also cannabinoids.
Okay, so maybe in the future you'll have a diet ready which actually will help you activate your endocannabinoid system without even having to take the drugs.
Yes, and if Jürg and I will win this grant and do the work, so hopefully we will present something
more precisely what it could be. But learning from wild monkeys, and so I mean, this is wild monkeys, urbanized monkeys, and captive monkeys. It's a very nicely defined population. In humans, this would be dramatically difficult because it's confounded by the food industry.
Right.
I would say. Yeah.
Okay, and spices. What kind of spices are you speaking of?
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of very well-known spices that have an impact indirectly, mostly on the system, like ginger, which is generally known to be anti-inflammatory. There is a very strong signal. There is things like basil that has like I've been working on beta-carotene, which is there are these two receptors. It's funny because in the brain, it's good to activate CB1, not with THC, but endogenously, or you help that. And in the periphery, it's in a way bad, but it's good to activate the other receptor. And there's a lot of spice-derived natural products that activate the other and are anti-inflammatory and somehow restore the balance. It's not fully understood, but I mean, Yossi has also published on this a lot, that there is this paradox. And I believe it's healthy eating that probably does the job. Yeah,
you have to write a cooking book.
Yeah. I mean, I was interviewed about that, about cannabimimetic food by it's well-known. Journals, but not scientific, I must say. So people have a very strong interest in that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. it's already almost 5 to 7. Yeah, not 6 exactly. Since we don't have such a strong cannabis research here in Switzerland, and we have Yossi Tam here, maybe you can just say a couple of words about the institute that you're director of?
Yes, so if you can put the other presentation in. This one? Yeah, and just put it there. Yeah, so my first hat is to be heading my lab, Obesity and Metabolism, but also wearing another hat as the director of the Multidisciplinary Center for Cannabinoid Research. And as I already showed you, we believe in innovation, in research that is well-funded in order to make new discoveries. And we created, in 2016, the Multidisciplinary Center for Cannabinoid Research, or the MCCR, that is basically integrates and coordinates the different activities of different laboratories at the Hebrew University, not only myself, but others working on cannabis, based on the vision and the work that has been done by Raphael Meshulam for the past 60 years. I will show you briefly a movie about the center. So knowledge moves us, and this is our logo, and we serve our center is the biggest center about cannabis research in Israel and all over the world. We basically serve as a research and development engine to do cannabinoid research, but the research areas span from obesity that I'm doing, but also about pain and epilepsy and allergy, addiction, aging, you name it. Everything that is related to our physiology or pathology are being researched at the Hebrew University around cannabinoids. The research is done by 40 research laboratories located in many faculties around Israel. Currently, we are running over 100 different projects. These are 6 examples of research activities that are done in the center. Think about an array of students and undergraduate and graduate students that are working in this space. And basically, in the last 2 years, we published a lot of papers about cannabinoids, over 100. We write patents about cannabinoids. The Hebrew University is located among the 10 different companies that develop patents related to cannabinoids, with many activity through the technology transfer company of the Hebrew University, and we raised a lot of funding, about 20.5 million, that goes toward research. The funding is getting, we get the funding from non-profit organization, like the Ministry of Science and Technology and Space, the Israel Science Foundation, the ERC, you name it, but also from donation. This is part of my visit here to Switzerland, by the friends of the Hebrew University, of course, that get this donation to conduct research on cannabinoids, and from companies that really interested in cannabinoid-based therapeutics and technology that invest early in research and development done at the Hebrew University. And if you would like to read more about our research, you can visit our website, it's listed here, and read about our researchers, research and available technologies. And with that, I will finish. Thank you.
Okay, so in the last remaining minutes, we're going to open the conversation and take a couple of questions from the audience. What will be important is that each of you has a microphone in that little gray box that you can open up. And so when you ask the question, you have to press the button first, and after you finish asking the question, you press the button to turn it off. So because otherwise everybody's going to have their microphone on. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the first question, please.
Yes, my name is Mark Robner. Mark, question for you. When you talk to patients, one of the classic complaints is overweight. What shall I do? And then you talk about diet, etc., etc. And the classic answer is, I only eat fruits. I eat very healthy, no bread, no pasta. I only eat fruits because, as everybody knows, fruit sugars don't do anything. So can you please give a statement about that?
Yeah, so first of all, there is often a lack on realizing how little calorie we need a day and how many calories there are in some things. But, and just an example, I had a policeman who said he's eating almost nothing, and then we started, and he said he was 170 kilogram, and he started and he said, in the morning I'm eating just a few croissants, and I said, how many? And he said 10, and I said, 10, you know how many calories is there? I said, yeah, but they are so light. I remember that. So often, and then the patient don't tell you because they have the feeling they had eaten nothing. Having said that, I'm quite convinced that what we classically call healthy food is healthy, and people really eating a lot of fruit and vegetables typically don't gain so much weight, and I'm really almost not limiting fruit to my patients, and then I'm looking at other things and reduce them, and then it's successful. Fruit is fooling you, is good taste and so on, but fruit is not fruit juice, and that's also sometimes some people say, yeah, I'm taking a lot of fruit, and then they come with a fruit juice. Does it address your question?
No. No, to eat lots of fruits, is it good or bad?
I think it's good at the end of the day because the satiety is quite high and the amount of calorie in it is quite low. So I believe it is. Now you still have people obese, but you can also ask the question like that if they would not eat food and would eat more chocolate instead, they would be even more obese. So that's also something to take into account. Does it now address the question?
Maybe fruits with a lot of fibers. You know, I think this fiber component, it's clear from the literature, it's right. Extremely important. It has a balancing effect. So this is what you said, that the orange juice is terrible, but actually eating the whole orange with all these fibers and everything, and the apple, not just the pressed apple, but the whole fibers.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I have a question. It's known that years ago the BMI was lower. Let's say it could be an excuse when we talk about war times, but even before war times the BMI was much lower. So now when so much people are suffering from being overweight, somehow now the WHO since 2 years says this is a sickness like high blood pressure. We know that 90% of the people have high blood pressure. That's not their fault. So the same is now with these overweight people. But somehow we should ask ourselves, where is the chicken and where is the egg? Because this all starts like 30, 40 years ago. Nobody puts the gun on the head of these people to eat it. And I mean, many people here are not overweight. So it's still a question like, okay, somehow it's related. Now we found a drug to treat against. Now it's a sickness, but before it was their own fault. And now somehow, I mean, what happened? I mean, these people should exist before already, and it should be a sickness before already. Why is it now the reason and before it wasn't?
I wouldn't completely agree with you. I think that for many years we knew that obesity is an issue, and there was already since 15 years bariatric surgery has been introduced for that. I understand what you are saying, and there is a danger that now that there is a drug, and you're correct, is that there is an incentive for the industry to make the people dizzier so that they can sell more drug. That's a danger, but I still would say that, and there is something in that, but I think that before we had drug, we were just more frustrated because it was more difficult to help the people with obesity. And I don't think that since we have the drug, we are saying more that it is a disease. For many years, we know that obesity is a disease.
Right, and it took the regulatory offices, the FDA or the EMA, to realize that it is a disease that involves not only the weight, but also many other, as I mentioned, clinical condition, hypertension you mentioned, but also dyslipidemia and other factors. And the treatment paradigm to start with lifestyle intervention was always there. However, people do not really react to this, and therefore we need to find a different solution. So by appreciating the fact that it is a disease, then the FDA can ask, or the EMA can ask companies, okay, start looking about the mechanism. How do you target this mechanism? Develop drugs that will assist you to trigger also lifestyle intervention in your patients.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It was great. I still haven't given up on people's will to actually change their lifestyle, and I think there's a lot of education that's lacking throughout the world about how we eat and the lifestyle behind it. And I think the easy way is always to get like a pill, the magic pill. And for me, there's a lot of still education that's missing, and for canola oil, for me, a good salmon with Oregon and walnuts will do the trick. My question is more about things that are also part of our heritage, which is fasting, Yom Kippur. Any idea of views on the benefit of fasting that you've seen to lose weight?
Did you run any clinical trials with intermediate fasting?
Yeah, so
Fasting, several days, not necessarily intermediate fasting.
So first, to your first point, I still hear a little bit of moralization, and it's not that you are not right, and it's really a difficult balance. Of course, there is an effort that everyone needs to do, and of course, one can have an impact on his body weight. But if you look, 99% of the people who do only lifestyle fail to control their body weight. So you cannot say that 99% of the obese individuals have just bad will. There is more on that, and that's a whole complexity of the things.
But 99% of the people after the treatment by medical, after 3 years, as you've shown, are back and they gain weight again.
And therefore we need a lifelong treatment.
So we give drugs to like 40% of the US
maybe
forever.
It will be high numbers, but we have around 30% of the US taking statin, and if they control body weight, there may be less. But I think it's really a delicate balance, and you shouldn't say you're completely innocent if you have an increased body weight and you shouldn't do any effort and give up lifestyle. I said it, I think, quite clearly. I don't give up lifestyle, but it doesn't work sufficiently in a large number of individuals, and I think that shows the complexity of the trouble. And I think also evolutionary, we were made to survive in an environment with not enough food, and we were selected over thousands of years to have no sufficient access, and food is so much critical that the drive to have enough food is extremely strong. It's really the basic survival. And now that we have enough food, you should be able to refrain, and we are not made of that. So just to say all these aspects. And yes, I have also a difficulty to accept that, but I think we have to accept it, that we are genetically not selected for have enough food, and therefore we need drugs in a lot of cases. Now the other question, which is easier, about Yom Kippur and so on, I have to say that I like to have religious people in my outpatient clinic because they know how that they don't pass away if they don't eat 24 hours. And I build on that. So that's for me the interesting of Yom Kippur. It doesn't happen anything if you don't eat. And you know, and I'm telling to some people, hey, when something is not kosher, when you don't allow to eat, you don't eat it. So you should do that. But then you really have to believe in God, like to believe in your doctor, and typically they don't believe in me as much as in God. But that's one thing. Then the other thing is intermittent fasting. At the end of the day, and there was recently a large study in the New England show that it doesn't really make a difference. At the end of the day, there is a lot of hypotheses. The only thing which is clear, you have a certain amount of calorie to burn, a certain amount of calorie to eat, and when the netto balance is below, you will lose weight. And everything else, I think, is not really proven. But for some people, it works well, so do it. I'm offering to the patient a different diet, and there are many of them, and everyone has to see which one fits to him better.
And maybe to link to what Mark just suggested, for many years, so the endocannabinoid system that I described is an evolutionary conserved system that helped during conditions of lack of food to be overactivated. And indeed, if we now fast mice, humans, there is overproduction of endocannabinoids that triggers us to conserve this energy and to stay alive in these conditions of lack of food. Okay, so it's kind of linked the fasting with the cannabinoids.
And isn't there also a paradox, a metabolic paradox? If you look at an elephant and what they are eating to maintain that size, it's actually not sugar or cheap calories. It's leaves, all that, like crazy. But that when you are overweight, and there is now a definition of what's pathological, probably, but I'm not sure. You need less intake to maintain almost that it gets worse. It's like a vicious circle that you should actually decrease your food intake to maintain that weight, but actually when you are leaner, that the metabolism somehow adapts in the wrong way, and with a medication you can break that, and you might go in a normal range where it is much easier to have a healthy lifestyle. I would assume if you are really very much obese, it's very hard to have a healthy lifestyle, but you have a lot of experience, and I don't know, it's just...
Yeah, so at the end of the day, what comes out is also the yo-yo effect, what you say, and the fact is, and that's very nasty, that of course if you have an obese individual, he's, let's say, 120 kilogram of weight, then to maintain his weight, he needs maybe 2,000 calories or 2,000, let's say 3,000 a day. And when he loses weight, then of course he needs much less calories, because before that he were weighting his weight the whole day. So if he eats the same than before the diet, he will put on weight. And that's something that people need to realize. And then on top of that, there are some metabolic adaptation to starvation, which makes it even more difficult. So the nature hasn't made it simple to lose weight. And we are a little bit compensating with some drugs.
Okay, so we have time for one last short question.
And short answer, I guess.
You already asked one. Somebody else? You?
There are two.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. I realized in the last 30 years about how much it changes in society, the approach to food. Like 30 years ago, I go to a restaurant and I ask for vegetables, And it is completely different today, where they ask, oh, you are vegan? And 30 years ago, it was really a different situation than today. Now, I'm interested in, you were talking about politics, about sugar and healthy food and so on. So what is your engagement to change the attitude from society to go in the direction of healthiness? Like when I go to a restaurant or a coffee shop or whatever, and I want to order something, the first thing is the waitress or the waiter is coming and say, you want a Prosecco, you want a glass of wine? And say, no, I would like to have a bottle of water. And then you see the face, and they bring you a glass which is usually quite ugly. So this is about enjoying healthy food or drink, whatever. So how do you deal with that? We were just having the word incentive somehow. Of course, the gastronomy, they earn more money with alcohol drinks. I'm clear about, I'm aware about that. So what do you do to go in that direction, which is more healthy? I like water in nice glasses.
I think it starts and ends by educating people. And if you educate them early in life about what is good and what is less good to your life, then it will gradually affect what happened in the next 50 years. It takes time, and money moves us a lot. And basically, you can think about us or others as Don Quixote, right? That there are others that basically control this world, and we cannot manipulate all of them. We do our small changes, and by starting really early with education, you will get there. This is my own opinion.
One more last.
Sorry, I just want to resume the thing. You two are two systems, is it right?
Right.
You have two systems, and both now are available or not yet yours? I didn't get that.
So my drugs, the drugs that we are developing, are not yet available to the market.
Will they be available?
I hope if they succeed the clinical trials and show no toxicity and high efficacy, they will reach the market. Some of them, I hope, then in less than 5 years.
But now, still this system with the other Ozempic or...
Right.
Okay.
You will succeed.
Okay, so I think we'll leave it at that, and the question that you just asked is actually very important, because I work in the media, and the media likes hype stories about GLP-1 drugs. Of course, just as important is to write about healthy diets, healthy lifestyle, because there are differences. If you look at the US, look at their obesity rate, look at Israel, I don't know, look at Switzerland, we have a much, much lower obesity rate. So those social factors are just as important. So thank you very much.
Thank you.